They say when you become a parent, your world changes. But no one prepares you for the moment when your instincts to protect your child collide with the very people who raised you. That moment came crashing into my life on a rainy Thursday afternoon. And I haven't been the same since then. My name is Amira. I'm 34, a single mom, and a primary school teacher. My days are filled with lesson plans, storybooks, and bedtime lullabies. But one moment turned my childhood home into a battleground I never expected. It started with a simple text from my mother: "Drop off Zoya for a few hours. Your father and I miss her." I hesitated. My relationship with my parents had always been complicated, strict, traditional, and often cold, but I wanted my daughter to know her grandparents. Against my better judgment, I agreed that Thursday. I dropped Zoya off around noon. She smiled, holding her favorite plush bunny, her small fingers waving at me as I drove off. She was only going to be there for 3 hours while I attended a parent-teacher conference. I reminded myself it would be fine. But deep down, something felt off. By 2:30 p.m., the sky had turned gray. I had wrapped up my meetings early and decided to surprise them with pastries from Zoya's favorite bakery. I pulled into the driveway quietly, hoping to catch a glimpse of them laughing or maybe watching cartoons together. Instead, I heard shouting. The front door was slightly ajar. I heard my father's voice booming from the kitchen: "Do it properly. You missed a spot." My mother chimed in, sharper than ever: "You're already 6. You should know how to clean a plate." My heart stopped. I stepped in, unsure if I had heard correctly. Then I saw her, my little girl, standing on a stool, tears in her eyes, a sponge clutched in her tiny hand. Soapy water dripped from the sink as she tried desperately to scrub a ceramic plate. Her bunny lay on the floor, forgotten, wet. I stood frozen for a moment. The room spun. My mother turned, eyes widening. "Oh, you're early," she muttered. My father just crossed his arms, unbothered. Zoya looked up and burst into sobs, dropping the plate. It shattered. I ran to her, scooped her up, and held her trembling body close. "What are you doing?" I demanded. My voice cracked with disbelief and rising fury. My parents didn't flinch. Instead, my father said calmly, "She needs discipline. She was being lazy." Lazy? She's 6. My hands shook as I tried to process the words coming out of his mouth. My mother added, "You spoil her too much. She's becoming soft. This world doesn't go easy on girls who don't learn to work." I wanted to scream, but instead, I looked at Zoya's tear-streaked face and saw a reflection of myself, 20-something years ago, standing on the same stool, trying to please the same people. Back then, I didn't cry. I just obeyed. But my daughter wasn't me, and I wasn't the same woman anymore. I took a deep breath and held Zoya tighter. "We're leaving," I said. My father stepped in front of the doorway. "You're overreacting. This is how we raised you, and you turned out fine." Fine? I turned out anxious, constantly apologizing for things that weren't my fault, doubting my worth, and shrinking myself to fit the molds they set. But they never saw that side. They only saw what they called success. I stared at him. "No, I didn't turn out fine. I'm still unlearning your version of love." His face turned red. "So now we're the villains?" My mother added. "All because we told a girl to do some dishes?" But it wasn't about dishes. It was about power. Control. A 6-year-old doesn't need to wash dishes to learn responsibility. She needs safety, play, and tenderness. They never learned that, and clearly, they hadn't changed. I pushed past them and walked toward the door. My father barked, "If you leave like this, don't bring her back here again." My steps didn't slow. I replied, "Then I guess this is goodbye." As I buckled Zoya into the car, she clung to me. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" Her voice cracked like porcelain. I kissed her forehead. "No, baby. You did everything right. Grown-ups can be wrong too." That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing their voices, echoing in my mind. "You spoil her. She needs discipline. This is how we raised you." Over and over. But it was the sound of Zoya's quiet sobs that haunted me most. I wrote them a letter the next morning. No anger, no insults. Just truth. I told them I appreciated the sacrifices they made for me, but that I couldn't let history repeat itself. That I would protect my daughter, even if it meant walking away from them. Weeks passed with silence. They didn't reply. No calls. No texts. I wondered if I had been too harsh, but then I'd look at Zoya, laughing as she painted her bunny's ears purple, and I'd know I made the right choice. One evening, Zoya asked, "Mommy, why was Nana so angry at me?" I crouched beside her and said, "Sometimes people think being strict means being strong, but real strength is being kind, even when you're upset." She nodded, trying to understand, and went back to her painting. But I knew she'd carry that Memory for a long time, just like I carried mine. Months later, I got a letter. Handwritten. From my mother. She apologized. In her own way. I still don't agree with everything, she wrote, but I didn't realize how much I was repeating with Zoya. Maybe I wasn't as gentle a mother as I thought. She asked if we could meet. I didn't reply immediately. I needed to think, not just about her, but about what Zoya needed. I couldn't afford to bring her back into a place that didn't feel safe. Eventually, I agreed to meet her in a neutral space. A cafe. No Zoya. Just me. We talked. Slowly. Carefully. My mother cried. Said she was scared she'd lost us forever. I told her she hadn't, but there would be boundaries now. She nodded. I don't know how to change overnight, Amira. But I want to learn. I want to do better with Zoya than I did with you. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a beginning. We set rules. No yelling. No lessons, disguised as punishments. Respect for emotional space. And if she ever crossed those lines again, there would be no second chances. The first time Zoya visited after that, I stayed with her. My mother was cautious. Soft-spoken. Trying. I watched her kneel beside Zoya to build a puzzle, her hands trembling. Slightly. Old habits are hard to break, but effort means something. Zoya still asks questions sometimes. Why did Nana yell that day? I tell her the truth, in ways she can understand, because people forget what it's like to be small. But we're helping her remember. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe things will heal more. Maybe not. But one thing I do know is this, my daughter will never wonder where I stood when someone made her feel small. That she'll know I stood by her, even if it meant standing against the people who once raised me. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's silent meals where no one raises their voice. Sometimes, it's a grandmother slowly learning how to ask instead of command. And sometimes, it's a mother holding her breath every second her child is in the same room as the people who once failed her. After that initial visit to my parents' house, supervised and quiet, I found myself clenching my fists more than I realized. Every laugh Zoya let out felt like a little bit of trust being rebuilt, and every moment of hesitation from my mother gave me hope, but also doubt. Was this real? Or just temporary performance? We stayed no more than 2 hours. My mom gave Zoya a new sketchbook and watercolors. I remembered you loved to draw, she said gently. Zoya beamed. My father stayed in the other room, barely making eye contact, attention hanging in the air like an unwelcome guest. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. Driving home, Zoya said, Nana is learning. I smiled, though it was laced with worry. Yes, sweetheart. And learning takes time, just like when you first tried to tie your shoes. She giggled, then asked, do you think Nana will be nice forever now? The innocence of that question wrecked me. Children are born believing. Adults know better, do better, are better. It's our job to earn that belief every day, not betray it. I told her, we'll see. But no matter what, I'll always be there. Every time. At night, I thought about my childhood. The 6 a.m. wake-ups to clean the house before breakfast. The way praise was rare but criticism flowed freely. How silence was used as punishment and love was conditional. I used to think that's just how things were. But Zoya taught me different. She taught me what safety sounds like her singing to her bunny in the back seat. What healing looks like, her painting her dreams in pink and orange. What strength feels like, her tiny hand squeezing mine when I wanted to cry. The next visit was to a park, by my suggestion. Neutral territory. My mom brought juice and sandwiches. She sat beside Zoya on the swings. I sat nearby, observing. My heart beat fast, especially when I saw my mom gently brushing hair from Zoya's face. No commands. Just presence. It was strange in a way that made me hopeful and afraid at the same time. After we left the park, my mother texted me, thank you for trusting me. I know I don't deserve it yet, but I'm trying. I stared at that message for a long time. It was the first time in my life she'd admitted to not being perfect, but the real test came one Sunday. Zoya had a minor meltdown, she dropped her ice cream, got tired, and began crying. Loudly. I braced myself. I waited for the scolding, the eye roll, the stop embarrassing yourself tone I had grown up with. But my mother surprised me. She knelt, wiped Zoya's tears, and said softly, it's okay to feel sad when something you love is gone. I'd cry too. I blinked. Had she really just said that? Zoya nodded and hugged her. And I stepped away for a moment, pretending to check my phone, because the tears I had buried for decades were surfacing, and I didn't want to ruin the moment. Still, one person remained absent. My father. He hadn't spoken to me since that day at the house. Not a call. Not a word. He'd be in the room, but never in the moment. I thought perhaps he was too proud, or too angry. but I didn't care. My priority was my daughter's well-being, not his ego, until one evening, weeks later, when we stopped by briefly to pick up a book Zoya had left behind. My mother was inside. My father stood by the garden. Zoya ran up to him. Nana said flowers are her favorite. Are they yours too? He looked startled. Then, something softened in his face. Yes, he replied. Especially roses. Zoya smiled. I like sunflowers. She picked a dandelion and handed it to him. This one's for you. He didn't know what to do with it. For a man who believed emotions made you weak, that tiny gesture from a 6-year-old must have felt like both a gift and a challenge. As we were leaving, he cleared his throat. She's smart. Just like her mother. I nodded. Yes, and kind. And she knows she deserves love, not just rules. He didn't respond. But he didn't argue either. That was the closest thing I'd ever get to acknowledgement from him, and maybe that was enough. In the following months, things didn't become perfect. My mother still occasionally slipped, trying to teach with guilt instead of patience. My father remained mostly silent, but the volume was lower, the walls were thinner, and there was more listening than before, but I was no longer that obedient daughter walking on eggshells. I had found my voice. And more importantly, I had found the courage to walk away if I had to. Again, Zoya, for her part, flourished. She grew more confident, more expressive. She once told her teacher, "My mommy doesn't let people yell at me. She says I matter." The teacher wrote it in a note and sent it home. I cried reading it, because that's what breaking the cycle looks like, but it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's in the quiet choices, leaving when you should stay, speaking up when you were taught to be silent. Protecting your child in ways no one protected you. I still visit my parents occasionally, always with boundaries in place. Sometimes, Zoya sleeps over, but only if I'm with her. And only because I've seen enough change to trust it. For now, will my parents ever fully become the warm, emotionally intelligent grandparents I hoped for? Maybe not. But maybe they'll try, and trying matters. One night, as I tucked Zoya into bed, she whispered, "Mommy, will you always keep me safe, even from the people we love?" I kissed her forehead and said, "Especially from them, if I have to." And she smiled, knowing, somehow, that I meant it, because I do. Weeks later, we were invited to a small family gathering, my cousin Aaliyah's engagement. I almost declined. The idea of standing in a room full of relatives who often acted like judges instead of family didn't sit well with me. But Zoya wanted to go. "Will Nana and Nano Abba be there?" she asked excitedly. I hesitated before saying yes. Part of me wanted to shield her from the whole scene, but another part reminded me she needed to experience growth where it was safe and possible. Besides, I'd be right beside her. I wouldn't let history write over her again. We arrived early, dressed in matching teal outfits. Zoya held a bouquet for Aaliyah and practiced her congratulations, with all the seriousness of a child taking her role too seriously, which made everyone smile. As we entered, I spotted my parents across the room. My mother's eyes lit up when she saw Zoya. My father looked briefly, then turned away, pretending to adjust his watch. It stung a little, but it didn't surprise me. Some men age, but never mature. I reminded myself, I wasn't there to win approval. I was there for Zoya. Throughout the evening, my mother hovered. She offered juice, asked Zoya about school, and even helped her fix a loose hair clip. It was sweet, almost foreign. My father kept his distance, until Zoya approached him. Unprompted, she walked up with a piece of cake and held it out. "I saved this one for you. It has extra cream. I thought you'd like that." He stared at her for a second too long. Then he took the plate and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't smile, not really, but his voice was gentler than I remembered. And then, to everyone's shock, he added, "No one ever saved the best piece for me before." The moment passed quickly, but it stayed with me. My daughter had reached him in a way I never could. Not by forcing change, but by offering simple, unconditional kindness. Maybe she saw something in him I never dared to hope for. Later that night, as we prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside. "You're doing a good job with her," she said quietly, like the words were fragile. "Better than I ever did." I didn't know what to say. That one sentence felt heavier than a lifetime of explanations. But I managed to reply, "Thank you." I learned by doing the opposite of what I was taught. She didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She just nodded. And maybe that was her way of admitting she knew. Zoya fell asleep in the car, her head resting on her bunny. I glanced at her peaceful face in the rearview mirror and felt a deep, aching relief. We were okay. Not perfect, but healing. And that counted for something. A week later, I received a phone call I never expected. It was my father. I almost didn't pick up. My finger hovered over the screen for a few long seconds. But I answered. His voice was awkward, unfamiliar with softness. I wanted to say, I was wrong. That day. At the house. Silenced, I blinked. My breath caught. He continued, she reminded me of you, you know. When you were little. Always trying to be good. Always afraid of disappointing us. I didn't realize how much damage we'd done until I saw her eyes. And yours. I sat down slowly, overwhelmed. What changed? I asked. She made me a dandelion crown last week and said I looked like a king. No one's ever said that to me in my life. Not even my own father. His voice cracked. Just a little. I don't know how to fix things. But I want to try. If you'll let me. And just like that, after a lifetime of silence, something opened. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to make sure the path forward was one where Zoya's heart came first. Eventually, I said, trying is a good place to start, but I won't let you hurt her again. Not even once. I understand, he said quietly. She deserves better than I gave you. And for the first time, he meant it. Zoya and I visited the house again, this time with lightness. There were flowers on the dining table. Her favorite snacks were set out, and her bunny had a new knitted dress made by my mother. My father even helped Zoya plant sunflower seeds in the garden. Will these grow big like me? She asked. He smiled. Even bigger. That night, as we were leaving, Zoya kissed them both goodnight and said, I love you. I watched their faces melt, soften in ways I never thought possible. My parents weren't perfect, and they never would be. But for the first time in my life, I saw them making room for love, not through control or fear, but through humility and effort. And that, I realized, was enough. That I may never erase the wounds of my past, but I can build something better in its place, for Zoya, for me, and maybe even for them. That we are no longer repeating history, that we're rewriting it. The sunflowers bloomed a month later. Zoya ran outside to see them before school one morning, barefoot and giggling, her bunny swinging by one arm. Mommy, they're taller than me now, she shouted, her voice full of joy. My father stood beside her, watching quietly, hands behind his back, eyes distant but softer than I ever remembered. Something inside me loosened watching them, something long held, clenched since I was a girl and believed love had to be earned with silence and obedience. This wasn't just about parenting anymore. It was about rewriting a legacy. Later that evening, I sat on the porch with my mother, sipping tea. Zoya was inside, humming to her toys. My mother stared out into the garden and said, you know, I always thought we were doing the right thing. Teaching you strength. Teaching you not to depend on anyone. I nodded. You taught me to survive, but not how to feel safe. She winced, as if the words hit her square in the chest. I didn't know how, she admitted. My mother was worse. She didn't speak to me for days if I cried. I thought shutting down was normal. Now I see, it wasn't love. It was fear dressed up as discipline. She turned to me, her voice trembling. You broke the pattern, Amira. I didn't know that was possible. Neither did I wanted to say. But we were here, weren't we? I didn't do it alone, I replied. Zoya taught me. She's not afraid to cry, or laugh, or ask why. And I made a promise, to protect that spirit, no matter what it cost me. Asterisk. My mother nodded, eyes glistening. And I promise not to break it again. Inside, Zoya giggled. My father was letting her put stickers on his reading glasses. The old man who once raised his voice over a smudged glass was now pretending to be a unicorn with glitter stars on his forehead. And he didn't seem the least bit ashamed. That's the thing about healing. It's not always about grand apologies or dramatic reunions. Sometimes, it's found in the quiet between generations. A child laughing freely where her mother once stood crying in silence. A woman choosing to break a chain instead of holding it tighter. Asterisk. A week later, Zoya and I were lying in bed, the window open, letting in the breeze. She turned to me and whispered, Mommy, when I'm a grown-up, I want to be just like you. I smiled, blinking back tears. Why is that, love? Because you're brave. And you didn't let anyone make me small. I kissed her forehead, tucking her close. That's because you were always meant to be big, big-hearted, big dreaming, big enough to take up space. She snuggled in. And you'll always protect me? I answered without hesitation. Always. Even from the people I love. She drifted to sleep, breathing steady, her bunny tucked under her arm. And I laid there, staring at the ceiling, knowing the battle wasn't just won, it was transforming. The home I feared returning to was becoming one where my daughter could laugh, but I'd never forget that moment, when I walked into my parents' house and saw my 6-year-old being yelled at like I once was. That moment split me in two. And then remade me. It was the beginning of the end of the fear I had carried all my life. And the start of a life where I chose softness without apology. Firmness with compassion. And boundaries not as punishment, but as protection. Sometimes I wonder if Zoya will remember the day with the dishes. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. But I hope if she does, she remembers not the shouting, but the arms that lifted her, the voice that defended her. The door that closed behind us as we walked away, because that's the memory I chose to make louder. And as for me, I'm no longer afraid of going home, because now, I know, I carry home within me, and I'm building one where love never has to be earned through fear. Months passed. Life found its rhythm again. Zoya was now 7, more curious than ever, always questioning the world around her. One day, she came home from school with a drawing. It was a crayon sketch of a big tree with 3 smaller ones beneath it. "It's our family," she said. "You're the big tree. You give us shade." I looked at it closely. There was me, Zoya, her bunny, and 2 other trees standing off to the side. "My parents, they're in the picture too," I said gently. She nodded. "Because even if they were a little stormy, they're still part of the garden. But you're the one that helped everything grow again." Tears pricked my eyes. Children have a way of speaking truth in the simplest, purest form. They don't sugarcoat. They reflect what they live, and in that moment, I knew she saw me, really saw me, not just as her mother, but as the woman who broke the silence, who stood her ground in a house where obedience once meant survival. One weekend, we visited my parents again, now cautiously, but consistently. My father had softened. Not dramatically, but enough to let Zoya braid his hair with pink ribbons while he pretended to read the newspaper. My mother had started baking again, something she hadn't done since my teenage years. "I'm trying to create new memories," she said once, handing me a warm slice of cake. "Ones that don't come with shouting." Zoya giggled in the background, her laughter echoing through the house like a hymn. For once, this place didn't feel haunted. It felt newer still. I never let my guard fully down, because healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering with clarity. It's knowing what happened, accepting what can't be changed, and drawing a firm line around what never will happen again. One afternoon, I found a photo in an old album. It was of me, around Zoya's age, standing on the same stool she had once stood on, washing dishes, my small face solemn, focused. I stared at it for a long time, unable to look away. My mother walked by and saw it. She stopped. "I remember that day," she said. "You broke a glass. Your father yelled for 10 minutes. You didn't cry." I nodded. I had already learned not to. She sat beside me, quiet. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "I wish I had protected you more." There was no anger in her voice. No justification. Just raw, painful honesty. It was the closest thing to redemption she could offer, and I took it, not to erase the past, but to make peace with it. A few days later, Zoya came to me with a request that nearly broke me. "Mommy," she said shyly, "can you tell me about when you were a little girl? Like me?" I froze. My mind swirled with images I'd locked away, the cold scoldings, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, the fear of never being enough. But then I looked at her, eyes wide, heart open, not seeking trauma, just story, and I knew I could give her the truth without the wounds. "I was a quiet little girl," I said. "I tried very hard to make everyone happy. I didn't laugh as much as you do, but I wanted to. I was brave, even if nobody called me that." She tilted her head. "Did Nana yell at you too?" I hesitated. "Yes," I said gently. "Sometimes she did, because she didn't know how to talk gently yet. But we're all learning now. Even grown-ups." She thought about it, then nodded. "You're still brave. And now I don't have to be afraid." And that, right there, was the purpose behind every tear I had ever cried, every stand I had taken, every boundary I'd set so she wouldn't have to be afraid. That evening, I sat on my bed, journal open, and wrote down one sentence I never imagined I'd believe. The cycle stopped with me. Not because it magically ended, but because I fought like hell to break it, because I walked into that house and chose my daughter over tradition, because I faced my parents not as a wounded child, but as a healed woman, and because love, real love, doesn't demand pain first. That we still have our boundaries. Zoya doesn't stay over alone. I still watch for signs, still listen closely for the tone behind the words. But it's different now. My parents are no longer figures of fear. They are people, imperfect, evolving, and learning to show love in ways they never received it. One evening, Zoya asked if she could write a letter to her future self. I helped her fold the paper, seal the envelope. Then she asked, "Can I read it to you first?" She opened it, cleared her throat, and said, "Dear Zoya, if you're older and forget what love sounds like, remember how mommy protected you. Remember how Nana learned to bake cakes instead of yell. And remember that you are never too small to be strong, and never too big to be kind. Love." Younger Zoya, the one who still likes glitter, I cried, not out of sadness, but because for the first time in my life, I knew that the story didn't end with trauma, it continued in healing, in strength, in glitter-covered letters, and in quiet mornings with sunflowers, and that's a story worth telling. That a year passed, Zoya had turned 8, her front teeth gone and her confidence brighter than ever. She wore her bravery like a cape, helping classmates, asking bold questions, and standing up even when she stood alone. I saw pieces of myself in her, but I also saw something I never had as a child, freedom. That we'd built a rhythm of life that was soft, but strong. Our apartment had become a sanctuary filled with messy art supplies, mismatched socks, music on Sundays, and rules that prioritized kindness over control. We had laughter, yes, but we also had something deeper. Safety. One afternoon, after school, Zoya came to me with something clutched in her hand. "We're making family trees in class," she said, holding out the paper. "Can you help me?" I looked at the worksheet. There were boxes for names, mother, father, grandparents, siblings. It was so simple on paper, but in reality, it held the weight of everything I'd fought to change. I helped her fill out our names, hers, mine, her grandparents. She paused before writing Nana and Nanoabu. "Should I write them?" she asked softly. "They're part of the tree, but we cut off the angry branches, right?" My chest tightened. "Yes, we trimmed the parts that hurt, but we left the roots that could grow new things." She nodded and wrote their names, carefully, slowly, as though writing them with love, but with limits. That weekend, we visited them again. My father now used a cane, walking a little slower, and my mother had more gray in her hair. But something else had changed too. They greeted Zoya with warmth, not fake, not exaggerated, just steady. My father even asked about her drawings. Zoya handed him a folded picture. "It's our garden," she said, "the one we made after the yelling stopped." He looked down at it for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I'm sorry it took me so long to hear you," he said, barely above a whisper. Zoya smiled. "You heard me now. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But perfection was never the goal. Peace was, and peace, I learned, doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like a father kneeling down beside a child to ask her opinion. Sometimes it looks like a grandmother learning to bake quietly instead of barking orders. Sometimes it looks like a mother standing tall, not because she never broke, but because she learned how to heal." That a few weeks later, Zoya brought home her family tree project. She'd added something extra, a sun in the corner with the word "me" written inside. Around it were vines leading to every name. "Why the sun?" I asked. "Because I shine on all of them, even the ones who used to be cold." I choked back tears. That's what breaking the cycle really means. It means raising a child who doesn't just carry the scars, but who also carries the light. It means knowing your voice matters, even when your hands still tremble. It means standing in the same house that once tried to silence you and hearing your own daughter laugh there without fear. Zoya's birthday was small that year. Just a few friends, cupcakes with too much frosting, and a lot of glitter. My mother helped decorate. My father handed out party hats. They didn't try to control anything. They didn't raise their voices once. At the end of the day, Zoya climbed onto my lap, frosting on her nose, and whispered, "You gave me a good childhood." That one sentence undid something deep inside me, because that's what I'd longed to hear my whole life, and now I'd given it, not to myself, but to her. That's the real legacy, not pain, not silence, but love, louder than the past, stronger than tradition, and braver than fear, and I'll keep choosing it, again and again, for her, and for the girl I once was. It was Zoya's first school play. She had been cast as a narrator in The Giving Tree. Her voice clear and proud, her little hands dramatically waving as she told the story of growth, of sacrifice, and of love. I sat in the third row, heart swelling, hands trembling with pride, but what moved me most wasn't just Zoya on that stage. It was the moment I turned and saw my parents in the audience. My mother held a bouquet of small sunflowers, her eyes never leaving Zoya's face. My father, cane in hand, sat quietly beside her, still, respectful, almost reverent. When Zoya finished her final line, the crowd erupted into applause. But my parents stood, clapping before anyone else. Afterward, Zoya ran into my arms. "Did I do good?" I laughed. "You did amazing. You were brave." My mother stepped forward. "You were the best thing on that stage," she whispered, kissing her forehead, and for once, I believed her. As we walked back to the car, my father called out behind us, "Amira." I turned. He hesitated, then said, "Thank you, for not keeping her from us forever." I looked at him, this man who once yelled over broken plates and unmade beds. And I saw someone else now, not perfect, but softened by time, by regret, by love he never knew how to give until a child taught him how. I didn't do it for you, I replied gently. I did it for her. He nodded. I know. And I'm glad you did. We parted ways with quiet smiles, the kind that carry both sorrow and peace. That night, Zoya sat at our kitchen table, legs swinging, finishing her thank you cards for the play. One for her teacher, one for her best friend, one for Nana and Nano Abu, and then she looked at me. Can I write one more? I nodded. For who? For you. She scribbled something carefully, then slid the card across the table. Oh dear mommy, thank you for being my home, my voice, and my protector. I know you didn't have it easy, but you made it easy for me. I love how you love me. Love Zoya, I cried. Openly. Not the quiet, polite tears I used to hold back, but full, grateful tears that carried years of silence, struggle, and finally, peace, because it was true I didn't have it easy. But I made it easier for her, and that is what breaking the cycle looks like, not forgetting, not pretending, but rising up from the ashes with your arms full of everything they tried to take from you. Joy, safety, warmth, voice. That night, I tucked her into bed with a soft, I love you, and she whispered back, I always knew you did. And in that whisper, everything I once feared I'd never be became real. A good mother. A safe place. A quiet warrior. A healer of bloodlines. Years from now, she may not remember the exact words, the exact fights, or even the broken dish that started it all, but she'll remember this, that her mother showed up, that her mother stood tall, and that her mother taught her that love is not pain. And family is not fear, that it's possible to come from a story of silence and still write one filled with light, and that no matter how deep the roots of trauma go, new branches can always bloom, because one day, a woman came home to find her 6-year-old daughter crying at the sink, and chose never to let that happen again. Years passed, as they always do. The apartment that once echoed with Zoya's footsteps slowly grew quieter. The glitter faded from the corners of the rug. The bunny, once a constant companion, sat retired on her bookshelf, still wearing the little dress my mother had knitted. Zoya was 13 now, taller, sharper, a mix of her younger curiosity and a teenage need to question everything. She'd grown into herself like a tree that had been allowed to bend toward the sun instead of being forced to grow straight under pressure. One afternoon, we went back to the house I once feared, the house where I once stood in the kitchen, holding my daughter close while her innocence cracked like a dish on tile. But this time, we weren't going because we had to. We went because we wanted to. My father was sitting in the garden, older now, slower. The sunflowers had long since died, but the soil still held their story. Zoya sat next to him and asked if he remembered planting them. He nodded and said, they were her favorite. Whose? She asked. He looked at me. Your mother's. Before she passed. My breath caught. Zoya turned to me, confused. I hadn't told her yet. My mother had passed 2 months ago, quietly, in her sleep. We hadn't wanted to overwhelm Zoya during her final exams. But now, it was time. I was going to tell you. After school started again, I said gently. But yes, she's gone. Zoya blinked, then nodded slowly. Did she know we loved her? She did, I said. And more than that, she loved us back. In the best way she could. It wasn't always the way we needed, but it had become enough. After the funeral, I found a letter my mother had left for me, tucked into the pages of a journal I never knew she kept. It read, Amira, I was too proud to admit how many times you were right. I didn't know how to be soft with you until I saw how fiercely you were soft with her. Watching you with Zoya taught me what motherhood was meant to be. You didn't just raise a daughter, you raised a world where girls can feel safe. I hope you forgive me for learning too late. Love always. I read it twice. Then again. And again. Forgiveness had already come, but this letter gave it form. Closure. A kind of peace I never expected to receive. My mother would never see Zoya grow into adulthood, but her effort had planted seeds that would keep growing. Zoya sat beside me that evening, legs crossed, brushing the bunny's ears absent-mindedly. Do you think Nana would be proud of me? I looked at her, her strength, her softness, her spark, and said, she was already proud of you. Zoya smiled, then leaned against me. You made her better. No, I said. You did. She looked up. Me? You showed her what love without fear looked like. You gave her the chance to love better. She took it, and so did I. We sat in silence for a while. The wind picked up outside. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chime sang, then Zoya whispered, will you write a book one day? About all of this? I laughed. Why would anyone want to read about our messy family? She grinned. Because it's not just about mess. It's about how you made something beautiful from it. That matters. And maybe she was right. Maybe our story wasn't just ours. Maybe it was for every mother who still wonders if she's doing it right. for every daughter trying to unlearn survival and learn softness. For every person standing at the edge of generational pain, wondering if it's worth walking away from everything just to save one heart. Yes, it is worth it, because when I walked out of my parents' house that day, my child in my arms, my voice shaking but firm, I didn't know if it would lead to reconciliation. I didn't even know if we'd be okay, but I did it anyway, and that choice? It changed everything. It created a home where my daughter could laugh. It gave my parents a final chance to love deeper. It allowed me to see myself not as a victim, but as a builder of something new. And now, the dishes sit in our sink sometimes, unwashed, forgotten, because we were too busy painting, or dancing, or just being alive without fear, and I wouldn't trade that for all the spotless plates in the world. Zoya turned 16 on a quiet Saturday morning. There were no big decorations, no extravagant surprises, just her favorite pancakes, jazz playing from the kitchen speaker, and a little silver box waiting for her at the table. Inside was a necklace with a small sunflower charm, and a note folded behind it in my handwriting. For all the days ahead, when the world feels loud, this will remind you where your peace lives. You are the sunlight we planted. Love, a mom. She hugged me tightly. You always know what I need before I ask. Asterisk. I smiled into her shoulder. That's because I watch with my heart, not just my eyes. We ate slowly, laughing about her early birthday parties, remembering the glitter, the bunny, and the frosting disasters. Then Zoya grew quiet. Do you think I'll be a good mom one day? She asked. I blinked, my throat suddenly tight. Asterisk. If you choose to be, I said, brushing a crumb from her cheek, you'll be an incredible one. Because you've lived in a home where love doesn't shout, where love listens. She nodded, eyes glossy. I want to give someone what you gave me. And that was it. The entire purpose of every decision I ever questioned, every confrontation I feared, every tear I cried behind closed doors while holding her in my arms, because what we pass down matters more than what we inherit. Zoya had inherited safety, softness, voice, and not fear, not silence, not shame. In the years that followed, we continued to visit my father. He moved into a smaller house after my mother passed, a little garden, a single chair under the mango tree. Zoya brought him books. He made her tea. They didn't speak much about the past, but they didn't avoid it either. Once, while watering the plants, he said to me, if I could go back, I'd have been gentler with you. I didn't understand what I was breaking. I looked at his aging hands, stained with soil. You can't go back, I said, but you helped build forward. We buried my father quietly the following winter. Zoya placed a single sunflower on his grave and whispered something I didn't hear. Later, I asked her what she'd said. She smiled softly. I told him he got better in the end. And he had not perfect, but better, because he chose to let the cycle stop with me, and not start again with her. Asterisk. Zoya moved out when she was 19 to attend art school. I helped her pack, pausing often to hold her, to remind her to eat, to tell her she could come home anytime. Not because I don't trust you, I said, but because home isn't a punishment. It's your safety net. She hugged me. You made it that way. When she left, the silence in the apartment felt different from the old kind, the fearful, frozen silence I grew up with. This was the silence of peace, of memory, of knowing the walls now held laughter, not shouting. Love, not fear. I kept the bunny on her shelf, though the ears were now floppy and one leg had a permanent ink stain. I couldn't bring myself to store it away. It reminded me of who she was, and of who I had become. Years passed again. Zoya sent me postcards from exhibitions. Sometimes she'd call just to cry about a bad critique or celebrate a small win. Sometimes she'd ask, how did you know what to do when no one had done it for you? And I always answered honestly, I didn't know. I just chose you over everything else. One day, in the late spring, I received a message, you're going to be a grandmother. My heart exploded with a joy I didn't have words for, but beneath the joy was something more, relief that this new child would be born into a world where the chain had already been broken. Where the story would not begin with fear, but with safety. With a mother who once stood at a sink, small and trembling, and a grandmother who had once refused to let her daughter inherit that same tremble. The day Zoya gave birth, I stood beside her, her hand clutching mine, our breaths aligned. And when her baby girl cried for the first time, I felt generations shifting in that sound. I heard my mother's regrets, my father's silence, my own voice rising through it all. Zoya placed the baby in my arms and whispered, meet Amira. My knees nearly buckled, but I held that baby girl, my namesake, and kissed her forehead, knowing she would never need to unlearn her worth. She would never have to heal from the people who were supposed to love her. She would grow up in a story that began with yes, not enough that I looked at her, tiny, perfect, full of light, I said the words aloud, soft and certain the cycle ended with me. And this was the beginning of something brand new. Zoya's daughter, little Amira, grew fast. By the time she was 5, she was already asking the big questions. Why is your hair silver, Nana? Why do you smile when I dance? Were you always this nice? I laughed every time. No, I'd say honestly. But I grew into nice. Just like a seed becomes a tree. She liked that answer. Then I'll be the biggest tree. And I knew she would be. She had Zoya's fire, and something of mine in her stillness, a soft awareness that didn't need to shout to be strong. One morning, while braiding her hair before school, she asked, what was my mama like when she was my age? I smiled. She was magic. Messy, loud, kind. She asked 100 questions and never feared the answers. Like me? Exactly like you. She beamed. And I felt something settle inside me. This child would never know the kind of fear I'd grown up with. She would never wonder if love was conditional. She would never cry at a sink and be told it wasn't her place to ask why, because Zoya had built on the foundation I laid. And that's how healing works. It doesn't stop when one person breaks the chain. It multiplies, branches out, and becomes shelter for others. Years passed again. Zoya opened her own studio, a space where she taught young girls how to turn feeling into form. She called it the Sunflower Room. A name that made me cry when I saw the brass plate on the door. She had filled the walls with art made by children, wild, imperfect, expressive pieces that glowed with freedom. Above her desk, she kept 2 pictures, one of her 6-year-old self holding a dish towel with bunny ears flopped to one side, and one of the garden from her grandfather's house. This is where I began, she told her students. And this is where I grew. I visited sometimes, just to watch her. To sit in the corner with a warm cup of chai and remember the journey. One afternoon, while I was helping clean up after a class, Zoya turned to me and said, you know what I realized, Mom? What? I thought you were just breaking a pattern for me. But you weren't. You were creating a legacy. I looked at her, heart full. And you've made it bloom. She walked over and hugged me, not the rushed, distracted kind, but a full-bodied, arms around the soul kind of hug. I hope I'm as good a mom as you were. Asterisk, you already are, I said, without hesitation. And your daughter will say the same someday. That night, I went home and opened an old drawer. Inside was my mother's final letter, the one she'd left in her journal. I unfolded it again, this time without pain, only peace, and then I took out a new sheet of paper. I began to write, Dear Zoya, I didn't know what I was doing when I had you. I just knew I didn't want you to be afraid of love. I wanted you to grow wild, soft, brave. You did all that and more. You took what I gave you and expanded it beyond anything I dreamed. Thought if I ever did one thing right in this life, it was you. Love always. Mommy tucked the letter into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote on the front, for when you wonder if you're enough. Because I knew she would have those days. Every mother does, but now, she had something I never had, proof that cycles can be broken. That softness can survive. That one decision, one trembling voice saying, enough, can change the course of a family forever. Years later, I sat under a tree in Zoya's backyard, watching little Amira play with her friends. She was bold, joyful, free, the kind of child who didn't need to unlearn anything. She ran up to me with a dandelion crown and placed it gently on my head. You're the queen of the garden, she said, grinning, and this time, I believed it, not because I ruled with power, but because I had planted peace, and watched it grow into love. My bones ached more these days. Time had settled into my joints, gently but undeniably. My hair, once black as ink, had turned silver white like winter snow. Zoya offered to color it once, but I shook my head. I earned this shade, I told her with a smile. Every line, every strand, it's a story. And I had told many, some through tears, some through fierce decisions. But most now, through love. I sat more often now in Zoya's garden, beneath the wide branches of a tree we planted together the year her daughter was born. Little Amira had grown tall, with the grace of her mother and the spark of something that felt entirely her own. She was 11 now, bright-eyed, sharp-tongued, and full of questions. One warm afternoon, she brought out a small notebook and curled beside me on the bench. Nana, she said, we're writing family stories in school. I picked you. I blinked. Me? She nodded. Because everything started with you, didn't it? I was quiet for a moment. I suppose so, I said. But everything grew because of your mama. But she said she could only grow because of you. So I want to start with where it really started. She flipped open her notebook and looked up at me, expectant. Can you tell me again? The sink story. The one where you said no. That story, the moment my past collided with my future in the form of one shattered dish and a scream I'd waited my whole life to release. I looked at her and smiled gently. It wasn't just about saying no. It was about finally saying yes, to you. She tilted her head. To me? Yes, I said. To your mother. To my own little girl inside me. I said yes, to the kind of love I had never known, but believed was possible. She scribbled something quickly in her notebook. Then she looked up, eyes soft. Will I be brave like that one day? I touched her cheek. You already are. Because you ask. Because you feel. Because you never silence your heart. That night, she read her story aloud at school. My Nana was the first woman in our family to say, "This ends with me." She didn't hit. She didn't shout. She didn't stay silent. Instead, she stood up. She held her daughter. She walked away from fear. Because of her, my mama never had to wonder if she was loved, and because of them, I never had to ask. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium, not mine. Not Zoya's. Not even the teacher's. Later that evening, after we tucked little Amira into bed, Zoya and I sat together beneath the tree again. She reached into her bag and handed me an envelope. For when you wonder if you were enough, she said. Inside was a drawing, 3 trees. One old, tall, with silver leaves. One strong and blooming. One just beginning to be UDAT. The bottom, in her neat handwriting, you didn't just break the cycle, you built a forest. I looked up, but Zoya was already crying too, so we sat in silence, the kind that feels like home, letting the wind move through the branches overhead, and I thought, if I leave nothing else in this life, not money, not fame, not even words carved in stone, let this be what remains: a daughter who chose love, a granddaughter who lived in light, and a garden where fear never bloomed again. Amira, age 27. I often wonder how many women it took to get me here, and not just biologically, but emotionally. Spiritually, I stand in the middle of my own home now, sun pouring through the wide windows, books lining the walls, fresh flowers on the kitchen table, and I know this space wasn't just built with wood and tile. It was built with memory, with stories, with resistance and softness passed down like family heirlooms. I live with a kind of peace that, for generations, the women in my family could only dream of, and I owe that to them. To my mother, who raised me with steady arms and a voice that never flinched. To my grandmother, who once stood in the middle of a kitchen, holding a crying child, and decided, this ends with me, and even to my great-grandmother, who couldn't say no, but who bore the weight of silence so that someone one day would. I didn't understand the fullness of that legacy until Nana died. She passed in her sleep, quiet, graceful, her hands folded like she had finally let go. I flew home the same day. My mother met me at the door, older now, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes full of both grief and pride. We didn't say much at first, just held each other. That's how we've always processed pain, together, without needing to explain it. We buried Nana beneath the tree in Zoya's garden, the same one they planted the day I was born. I placed a letter into the earth with her. Thank you for protecting my mother, for planting peace, for choosing love, even when it hurt. Afterward, my mother and I sat beneath that tree in silence, like they once did years ago. She turned to me and asked, "What do you remember most about her?" I thought for a moment. I remember her watching me, I said. She didn't always say much, but her eyes, those told me I was safe. My mother nodded. She taught me how to look that way. That night, I found Nana's sunflower necklace in a velvet box among her things. Still polished. Still warm somehow. I wear it now, not just as jewelry, but as legacy. I teach now, creative writing. Young women, first-year students. On the first day of every semester, I ask them to write about the moment they first felt their voice mattered. Some write about a teacher, some about a friend. Some say, I don't think I've felt that yet, but I always tell them the same thing: you will, and when you do, hold on to it, because one voice can save generations. Then I tell them about my Nana, not just the woman who baked slowly or wore sunflower pins, but the woman who stopped an echo of pain that had traveled through time like a shadow, the woman who rewrote the script, the woman who made it possible for me to sit here now, in front of them, smiling without fear, and they always lean in closer to us if something in that story tells them they, too, can change the shape of the story they were born into. And I tell them, yes, you can. You don't need permission, you just need to love someone enough to stop the hurt. Sometimes I sit with my own daughter, yes, I have one now, and I tell her the sink story. She always asks the same thing: was Nana scared when she yelled at the grown-ups? And I always answer the same way: yes, baby. She was scared, but she did it anyway. Because she loved you? Yes. More than anything. One day, when my daughter is grown, I'll tell her everything, not just the gentle parts. Not just the garden and the bunny and the necklace. I'll tell her about the yelling, about the dish that broke, about the silence that used to haunt the walls before it was replaced by music and laughter. I'll tell her about her great-grandmother Amira, how she stood in front of the very people who raised her and chose her daughter over tradition, over fear, over comfort. I'll tell her how one moment of courage can echo louder than decades of silence, and I'll tell her that bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just staying soft in a world that taught you to harden. Sometimes it's cleaning up the broken pieces of a plate while choosing not to shatter the person who dropped it. I'll tell her that she comes from a line of women who were tired of hurting, but never tired of loving, because that's what I carry now, love. Not the kind that demands or punishes or withholds, but the kind that breathes and sees and makes space. My daughter deserves that kind of love. So did my mother, so did my grandmother, that we all did, and even though some of us never got it, we still built it from what little we had, piece by piece, gesture by gesture. Point 1, I hear you. 1, it's okay. 1, I love you anyway. And that's what a legacy really is, that it's not in the houses we leave behind or the names carved on stones, it's in the way our children exhale when they realize they are safe, that it's in how their hands never flinch, that it's in the way they speak their minds, knowing no love will be lost for doing so. That's what Nana gave us, that's what my mother protected, and that's what I'll pass on. Not perfection, but presence, not control, but connection, not obedience, but trust, because love like that doesn't just heal the person who receives it, it heals the one who gives it, too. Every time I choose it, especially on the hard days, especially when I'm tired, I become more whole, I become more like the women who made this life possible. So, I'll keep showing up, I'll keep listening, I'll keep saying, it's okay, sweetheart, even when she's crying, even when she's angry, even when I'm unsure what to say, because love doesn't always look like answers, sometimes it looks like staying, and I will always stay, just like Nana did, just like Mama did, just like she will, one day, for someone else. And when that day comes, I hope she remembers she is part of something sacred. She is proof that healing doesn't end with us. It begins with us, and it never stops growing. That she'll nod, thinking hard like she always does. Then she'll lean her head on my shoulder and whisper, I'm glad she did. Me too, because now, this daughter will never wonder if she's too much, too loud, too soft, too sensitive. She will live in a story of love, one started by a woman who once stood shaking but unmovable in a kitchen of her childhood home, and because of that woman, I live, I speak, I rise, I love without fear. This morning, my daughter asked if she could wear my necklace, the sunflower. She said, lifting it carefully from where it rested on my nightstand, I want to wear what you wore when you were little. I paused. I wasn't little when I got it, I told her softly. It belonged to my Nana. She blinked. The one who said no in the kitchen. Yes, I nodded, my voice almost a whisper. She was the first to make space for the rest of us. She held the necklace gently in her hands and asked, can I wear it just for today? I'll be careful. I smiled, my chest tight. Yes, baby, just for today. She beamed and fastened it around her neck with my help, then twirled in the hallway like she was royalty, a sunflower queen. And in that moment, I saw it all again, my grandmother's trembling hands as she wiped tears from my mother's cheeks, my mother's steady eyes as she raised me in truth and tenderness, and now my own daughter, untouched by generational pain, spinning freely in the light of a life they helped me give her. She doesn't know how much strength it took to protect her from the legacy we escaped. Not yet, but one day she will. One day, she'll come to me with her own confusion, her own doubts, her own fears that she's not doing it right, and I will hand her the necklace again, this time not just for the day, but for good, and say this was your great-grandmother's. It survived every scream, it held every tear, it is a symbol of every no that made room for a yes, wear it when you need reminding, not of what we endured, but of how far we've come. And I hope when she wears it then, it won't feel heavy, I hope it feels like wings, because every choice we made, all the uncomfortable confrontations, all the broken ties, all the nights we cried behind closed doors, was for this, a little girl twirling without fear. A home without raised voices. A mother who listens, a grandmother who protected, a great-grandmother who dared to begin again. Sometimes I wonder if Nana knew how far her courage would travel, if she knew that saying stop in that kitchen would carry all the way here, to this house, to this moment, to this joy. I like to think she did. I like to think that even in her fear, she believed that love, true love, quiet love, could echo across generations, and she was right, because we are still here, still healing, still choosing softness, still growing sunflowers in the spaces where nothing used to bloom. I started writing seriously when I was 25, not just essays or poems or journal entries, but full, unapologetic stories, stories about girls like me, girls raised in the aftermath of pain but never shaped by it, girls who knew how to cry and laugh in the same breath, girls who had never flinched at the sound of footsteps behind a closed door. I Wrote for hours some nights, long after my daughter had fallen asleep, the only sound in the house the quiet clicking of my keys and the soft hum of the world resting. I didn't write to escape. I wrote to remember. To preserve, because I never wanted our story to fade. I wanted the world to know about a woman named Amira, who once stood in a doorway and protected her daughter with nothing more than her voice and her conviction. I wanted people to see Zoya, who raised me with hands that never threatened, only held, and I wanted them to see me, not as the third in a line of women, but as proof that legacies don't have to be inherited. They can be built. One night, after submitting a short story to a literary journal, I walked out into the backyard and looked up at the stars. My daughter, Mia, followed close behind, barefoot and sleepy-eyed. "Mama," she said, "why do you always write so late?" I picked her up and sat with her on the porch swing. "Because that's when the stories are the loudest." She curled into me. "What kind of stories?" "The kind that help people remember who they are." She nodded as if she understood, and maybe she did, on some cellular level. Because even at 6, she asked questions the way I used to. Gently. Without fear, she placed her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Will I have stories, too?" "Oh, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead, "you already do. You just haven't lived through all of them yet." That summer, I was invited to speak at a conference on intergenerational healing through storytelling. I almost said no. I was used to being behind the words, not in front of them, but when I told my mother, Zoya, about it, she smiled in that quiet, proud way she always did and said, "It's time." So I went. I stood on a small stage in a sunlit room, the microphone too tall at first, my heart beating fast. The crowd wasn't huge, maybe 50 people. But each face looked up at me like they were hungry for something, not drama, not entertainment, truth. And so I told them about a dish, a scream, a child trembling by a sink, and a woman who said, "Stop." I told them about the years that followed, and how love doesn't come naturally to those who were never taught it, but how it can still bloom, if someone is willing to plant it anyway. I ended by reading a letter my Nana had written to my mother, the one she tucked into her journal before she died. Her apology, her recognition, her love. When I looked up, I saw tears in every direction. Afterward, a woman came up to me, her hands shaking as she held mine. She was probably in her 60s. "I have a granddaughter," she said. I yelled at my daughter the way I was yelled at. And now, she won't let me near her baby. She paused. I didn't know how to say sorry until today. I squeezed her hand. "Say it now. It's not too late. The story's still being written." When I got back home, I found a letter in the mail from the journal I'd submitted to. My story, The Sink, had been accepted for publication. It would be printed next month. I cried on the kitchen floor, not because I'd been published, but because I knew Nana would have been proud. Even though she never saw a page I wrote, she was in every sentence, and maybe, somewhere, I was in hers. One night, Maya came into my room crying. She had a nightmare, one where I was yelling at her, she said. Her face was red, her little chest heaving. "Did I do something wrong in my dream?" she asked. "Is that why you were mad?" "No, baby," I said, pulling her into my arms. "Even in dreams, if I yelled, it would never be your fault." She sniffled. "But you never yell."